socialism doesn't work. It's not good for people. It it and it could destroy everything we've built here. If we implement socialism, it will destroy it. Absolutely. There's no question about that.
Hello, and welcome back to Cranbox Weekly. Today, I've got a guest on the show to talk about economics and the reason that socialism is, as he says, doomed to fail. A little bit about our guest before we get started. Dr. Doug Cardell is an economist and economic policy expert with a unique perspective. His diverse career includes roles as an aide to a member of Congress, a corporate CEO, an award winning educator, a consultant to the Arizona Department of Education, and a professor of mathematics. His expertise spans economics, economic policy, mathematical modeling, and system dynamics modeling. He holds an advanced degree or multiple advanced degrees and certificates from the University of Arizona, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and the University of Phoenix, as well as a PhD in economic policy from Liberty University. His comprehensive understanding of economics, both from a theoretical and practical standpoint, his proficiency in mathematics and modeling, and his success as an educator make him uniquely qualified to explain economics and evaluate economic systems and ideas. I should add that Doug has recently written a book titled Why Socialism Struggles, and that book will be available for purchase on the 20th of January. Doug, like I said, at the end, we'll let you plug that a little bit more and get a little bit more detail on it. How are you doing, Doug? How's your day going?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing. This is I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a little nervous. This is my first interview with someone on our show, so the bar has been set pretty high with everyone else that I've talked to on their shows. So hopefully I can meet them at their level. Um, what I want to do is I want to kind of jump right into the thick of things, if you don't mind. And the first question I have for you is: you argue that economic forecasting is essentially impossible, and we talked about this in our pre-interview. Um, you also argue that this makes central planning unworkable. Um, where would you draw the line between difficult forecasting and fundamentally impossible forecasting?
The economy is what's called a chaotic system. Chaotic systems exist whenever there are a really large number of actors that can all affect what happens. The chaotic systems were first discovered by a guy named Lorenz, Professor Lorenz, in 1972, I think. And what he found, he was building weather models. And what he found was that if he made a tiny little change in the input of a weather model, it could make a gigantic change in the output. And you've probably heard his famous saying, can a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil precipitate a tornado in Texas? And that's exactly the problem with chaotic systems is tiny input changes can make huge output changes. And that's because all these things are interacting. In the case of the weather, it's air molecules, water molecules. All of these things are working around, moving from place to place, and we reach tipping points. And so in one of those tipping points, one molecule might make the difference. And so I could paraphrase Lorenz and say, could buying a pair of shoes in Peru trigger a depression in Poland? And the answer is yes. That's certainly possible. And so the economy is no more predictable than the weather. Now, we tend to think of the weather as predictable, but it's not. I'm in about 50 miles north of Tucson. And if you care to take a look at any weather app right now, it'll project that the temperature here should reach almost 80 today, maybe 81. It's 69 right now. It's never going to hit 80. And so the weather can give you a general idea. And I would challenge your listeners to find your favorite weather app, look at the weather for the next week, write it all down, wait till next week and see what happens. And what they'll find out is it's not very accurate. One of the studies I did was based on the Consumer Production Index, consumer expenditures. And what I did was I tracked the Federal Reserve's predictions for 30 years every quarter and looked at their predictions a year out. They were right 46% of the time. Now, you could do better flipping a coin. Now, that doesn't mean I think the Fed is incompetent. It's quite the reverse. I couldn't do any better. The problem is it's a chaotic system. As a chaotic system, it's absolutely impossible to make predictions any distance in advance. In the weather, they say the best you could do is 2 weeks out. In the economy, it's probably about the same. The problem with any planned economy, like a socialist economy, is that they're going to hire somebody like me and they're going to say, okay, Dr. Doug, you tell me how many cell phones we're supposed to order a year from now. How many Dodge Rams do we need a year from now? How many cartons of Coke do we need a year from now? I have no idea. And there's no way I can make those predictions. They're going to be basically guesses. And that's also why you see, if you look on the internet for economic projections, what you'll find out is you ask a dozen economists and you'll get 15 different answers, because we're all just taking our best shot at it. But we also, at least all those of us that are honest, understand that we are just making educated guesses, and it's never going to get any better than that. And so weather prediction will never get any better than it is about now. That's what Lorenz was able to prove. And the same thing is true of economics. And so the bottom line is, how can I plan an economy if I can't even predict what's going to happen? And so always planning requires prediction.
So to that point, I mean, you look at major companies like, say, Apple, they have to plan in advance how many of a certain new iPhone that they need to make, or when they need to stop making their older models in order to ensure that they maintain the flow of income that they are required to maintain in order to be profitable and continue to develop new products. So, wouldn't that be a form of predictive modeling that does work or is required to work?
It is. And the difference is that when companies do it, the companies can rise or fall based on those models. And in point of fact, if you look at the Dow 100 years ago, none of those companies are left. Why not? Because they predicted wrong. And so the advantage to free market capitalism is when a company predicts wrong, that company suffers. It may not go out of business entirely, but it will suffer. And if we try and do that with the entire government, though, the rest of the economy isn't there to absorb that loss. And so the whole country is going up and down in one gigantic movement. So if Apple should predict wrong and lose 20% of its sales next year, that'll create imbalances in the economy that other actors will absorb. So Samsung may pick up the difference.
Hmm. So
And
it's
so
similar to the way that Microsoft made some gambles with the Zune and the Microsoft phone, and even Windows Vista, and
exactly,
they failed in those areas, and that's what has caused them to take a backseat to modern technology.
that's exactly right. And so do we want to make those same kind of bets with the people's money? And I would say no, we don't. We're making
Hmm.
those bets with the stockholders' money. And if some of them lose, some of them lose, and some of them will. That's the nature of free market capitalism, is that, but that's also what makes it so great, is that things go up and down based on consumer choice. And that's what socialism doesn't allow. They have to end up making sure you have no choices, because if you have any choice, you're going to change the economy. You become one of those butterfly flapping its wings, and you may create a whole systemic change that they didn't anticipate. And so what they have to do is eliminate any possibility of that. And the way to do that is to force you to buy what they want you to buy. So they decide, I'm going to make 15 100,000 Yugos next year, and you have to buy one.
Right. Which creates that issue of market supply and demand in the market. Um, so it, to that point, if it's next to impossible to predict the markets outside of that 2 week window, um, what would the role of the government be with regards to the market? Should the government just step back and let the market handle itself, or does the government need to be involved at some point in some aspect
There's
of that?
definitely a role for government involvement. In any human enterprise, there will be bad actors, people that will try and
Mhm.
abuse whatever system they're in. And a free market economy is no different. And so the government definitely has a role in as a policeman in making sure that people that are harming the economy are kept from doing so. So examples of that would be monopolies. There's no problem with the government regulating monopolies. Monopolies are bad things for the economy. The problem is the government too often comes in and does stuff where it shouldn't be doing stuff and doesn't do the stuff it needs to be doing. And it's really a thorny problem. One of the examples I use in my book is this: if you're getting robbed and you call the police and they send the police to your house and the police jump in to help, and what they do is they help the burglar load your stuff into his car. Too often, that's what the government does. So in that situation, I would be upset with the burglar, but I would be a lot more upset with the police. That's the way I view the economy. Are there bad actors out there that are going to try and do things that they shouldn't do? Yeah, but it's the government's job to fix that. I'm here in Arizona right now. We have a thing called the open range laws. What that means is if you want to keep cattle off your property, and I have quite a few acres here where I am, and I spent hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars fencing out cattle. And it has to be a very specific, what's called a legal fence. And why is that happening? Why do I have to do that? Because at some point in the past, the government decided the cattle industry should have a break. They should help the cattle industry take my money. And I've actually talked to big ranchers about this. And what they said was, don't you want cheap beef? And I said, here's what you're doing. You're giving the country cheap beef on the back of Arizona property owners. And that's not right. If
Right.
your
So I mean,
dog
so at the
bites
end of the
somebody,
day, you're sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm just for me, it, when we talked last, I was blown away just by the fact that I'm talking to you confirms the fact that I am not the smartest person in the room ever. So like what I hear from that is that, a lot of these regulations that we have in place, they're in place because of political lobbying on Capitol Hill from these big corporations that are able to dump millions upon millions of dollars into those types of campaigns. And then they turn that around and um, essentially they gaslight you into, if you don't accept this, then you're against cheap beef. So, but at the end of the day, it's not cheap for you because you're having to spend that money on your property. So it in the long run, that beef is more expensive. You just don't see it directly attributed to that cattle. That's interesting. So does that same rule apply for the situation like we had with the Great Recession when the big banks got the bailouts and that money didn't
yeah,
really trickle down to us?
yeah, that's exactly the same thing. And government, those kinds of bailouts are very, very bad for the economy. Uh, as we just talked about, companies rise and fall based on their merits. And the government stopping that from happening creates imbalances everywhere else in the economy. And so if a company is going to go bust, it's going to go bust. It's not the government's job to try and fix that. And it shouldn't be. Uh, the government has to only intervene when there is, I guess, what I would call immorality going on, when self interest has escalated to greed. And so people are doing things that are harming the economy for their own benefit. And when I say morality, the situation I mentioned with the cattle, if your dog bites somebody, you're liable. But if a cow comes to my house and I don't have a proper fence up and breaks through my patio door and eats my furniture, I'm out of luck. And so, how is a cow different than a dog? To me, that's basically a moral issue. It's morally wrong to say that my pet or my animal can do damage and I'm not responsible for it.
Okay. So that's an example of where the government steps in and does things the opposite of the way that it's supposed to do things.
Yes.
Have there ever been instances where the government has stepped in for the good of the people rather than the good of the company and the rich folks that run the
Sure.
companies?
Yes. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt was known as the trust buster. Uh, he went after monopolies, and
Hmm.
that's a good thing. Now, some monopolies, there are a few sanctioned monopolies that may be okay. I say maybe because it's a gray area. But for example, the electric companies, you don't have a choice of five different electric companies, but
Hmm.
there's arguably good reasons for that. Um, do we really want to have sets of telephone poles set up for five different electric companies side by side? Well, that's probably not a great idea. On the other hand, there might be ways that we could allow different companies to share the same wires. And in that case, we might be better off. Um, and so, yeah, the government can do lots and lots of good things. And one of the most important is patent law. If you don't have a good patent system, you're not going to have a good economy because the government has to protect your ability to be an entrepreneur. That's what patent law does. It says if you come up with something, patent it, you get the rights to it. You get to be the one that profits from it. And that's a really good thing. The other thing is protecting property. In most failed states, take Somalia, for example, or Libya, the reason they are failed states is partly because the government is not strong enough to protect property, which means if you own something and somebody bigger than you comes along and takes it, you're out of luck. Well, people won't invest in property then if they have no guarantee that they can keep it. So, sure, the government does not only good things, but absolutely necessary things. Uh, but we need to keep that in hand. We have to keep a leash on it and make sure that they can't go too far because that's what typically happens is that um, bad actors end up manipulating government into doing what they do. Another really good example of that is licensing laws. Uh, 1950, about 1 in 20 people had to have a license to do what they were doing. Now it's about 1 in 3. And most of those licenses are required because the industry doesn't want newcomers. They're doing it specifically to keep out competition. And that hurts the economy because it means the next big idea may never get here. And we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. We want to make sure the next big idea does get here. And that requires that we make it easy for people to get going.
So you mentioned it earlier, and patent laws are things that are like way above my head when it comes to those things. But and sometimes I've thought about the fact because I started Cranbox Politics and we're developing this AI platform, and I've thought about doing the patent process, but I don't even know how to go through that to secure my idea. Meanwhile, I'm out here running around running my suck about it. But to your point, I did I have done some research into the healthcare industry, specifically with regards to reproductive rights and abortion. And what I found is that the American Medical Association uh, used licensing laws to push midwives and women out of the field at the very early stages of our country because they didn't have the licenses to do what they needed to do. And I think we saw that starting to occur prior to the Dobbs decision, where licensing laws were being used to push um, prenatal care, abortive care facilities out of the area because they were requiring these facilities to be certified along the lines of an emergency room, or the doctor that was performing the abortion had to have rights to go to the emergency room. Which I mean, and all that tells me is that it was a manipulation of the market in order for them to tighten control over who could and could not um, conduct or practice abortions. It's a different line of conversation than economy, but I kind of see that through line there. Sorry, I'm talking a lot, but the thing that you brought up earlier was the if it fails, it fails. What happens to the workers, right? So in a capitalist market, I used to always be, as a young kid, I used to always believe that the stock market crashes were like wildfires. They're there to thin out the market and allow for new growth to come in, just like a wildfire thins out the forest and allows for new growth to come in. But what about the workers? What about the employees of those companies that wind up with no job and then they're in the welfare lines trying to get money to pay for their food and housing?
Hmm. Well, first to your first point, yeah, in the healthcare industry, that's a lot of why healthcare is so expensive now. Is that we have to pay for things that could be done much less expensively and just as well. Now, yeah, do I want some newbie doing brain surgery on me? No. There has to be a certain amount of regulation, but we also have to acknowledge the fact that uh, people can deliver babies without having to have a medical degree, and uh, and that's true of a whole lot of other stuff. Now you have to have a license to be a physical trainer in most states, and the requirements are ridiculously harsh. Now, just before this show, I came back from a run. I didn't even have a chance to take a shower. I put on a clean shirt, and here I am. but but so I'm very active physically, and if I happen to hire a trainer and I don't like the way he's doing things, I'm free to say that and free to fire him. I don't need the government to say this guy has my stamp of approval. Um, that's not at all helpful. Now, as to the getting down to the employees, this is an area that I'm passionate about. It's critically important, and as a country, we do it wrong. The education system is geared in the wrong directions. We tell people that they have to work for a living. That's stupid. Nobody works for a living. Huh? Well, you could go out and dig holes and fill them up all day long, and you won't get paid for it. And the reason you won't is because you've created no value. That's what you do for a living. You create value. So few people are trained this way. What happens is they get out of school, high school, college, wherever they went, they go look for a job. They typically don't think about it a whole lot. They start applying for jobs. They get a job. After a year, they get a little bit invested in that job. After 5 years, they're a little more invested. After 10 years, they're penalized if they change jobs. So the first thing we have to do is to help people choose the way they're going to create value. And we do a lot of things in our systems that force that in the wrong direction. The trend that's been happening since the late 60s of giving people good grades for anything is a really, really bad thing to do to kids, because failure is great. Failure is really, really important because it tells you what you're good at and what you're not good at. And if you give kids good grades in everything, what they're going to think is they can do anything. What we should be helping people do is find, first of all, where their niche is, where they're really, really good. And they're going to have several choices. It's not going to be limited to just one or two. But it's likely to also tell them areas that they should stay away from. So if you get A's in math and F's in art, that's a pretty strong message. You might not want to be thinking about a career as an artist. Uh, and that's valuable. That helps the student. It doesn't hurt them. It's not like we're going out there to hurt the kid's feelings. We're giving the kid a message. Art's not your thing. Um, Now they may decide, well, I really want to do that. Well, fine, great. I mean, it's a free country, and so, but we shouldn't be rewarding that. We should be helping them give good information, and that means we are going to fail people at things sometimes. Um, and so, what once we get people looking for their niche, now what we want them to do is look for ways they can create value in that niche. And so, like right now, what you and I are doing, we're not sitting here getting a job. I didn't wake up this morning and say, "Oh, I got another one of those podcasts to do." And I'm betting you didn't either,
Not at all.
because yeah, what we're here for is to create value for your audience.
Uh-huh.
And that's exciting. I mean, I'm having fun. I hope you are. I hope you're having as much fun as I am. And it's
Yeah.
fun because I know I'm creating value. I'm creating value for somebody else, and hopefully we'll be able to make their life a little better.
Uh-huh.
And uh, that's the other thing about creating value. Not only will you probably do much better financially, but you're going to be a whole lot happier. And pick any job you want. Let's say you're working at a fast food joint. If you stop thinking about I've got to please my boss and start thinking about my job is to please that guy at the window. So I'm going to make this burger the best way I can make it. I'm going to make it look good. I'm going to make it taste good. And I'm going to serve it to that guy happily. I'm going to try and make his day when I hand him that burger. If you do that, I guarantee you're going to be happier. And it's very, very likely that in a couple of years, you'll be running the place. Because if you're making that end customer happy, you're going to make your boss happy. But that's the way you have to approach it, is to focus on the end consumer. I mean, you mentioned the fact that I was an award-winning educator. And I got to be honest, most of the people that were my bosses in education didn't really like dealing with me, because education is different than the private sector, because I was focused on making the best possible value I could for my students. But when you're in the public sector, the boss often doesn't care about the end consumer. The boss is worried about moving up and whatever. And so I very frequently ended up at odds with my bosses. But that's because the difference between the private sector and the public sector. If I had been in the private sector, my bosses would have been all over it. And in fact, that's how I ended up consulting for the Department of Education in Arizona, is because they recognized that what I was doing was working for the end consumer. And in any job you do, that's what you want to be shooting for. Is who's that end consumer, and how can I make him feel good? How can I make things better for that consumer? And now, what about employment and unemployment? Well, the reality is right now that things are changing faster than ever. The chances of somebody getting into a specific employment niche and staying there for their career are very, very small. That's not going to happen. On the other hand, if what you're focused on is if you've exploited your ability to create value, you're not going to have a lot of trouble getting another job. If that company goes bust and you're the guy that was always doing everything they could for the consumer, it's going to be easy for you to go to the employer next door that has the same sort of a job area and go with that employer. The problem is what we've got is people that aren't creating value. So the guy that's working at the fast food joint that puts in his time, passes out the burgers when he has to, and blah, 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 blah. That person's not going to find it real easy to make a job. He's not going to have glowing references. He's not going to have anything that says this guy is special, because this guy isn't special. This guy is just putting in his time. And so we have to help people understand that putting in your time way of thinking may have worked 50 years ago. It may have worked 100 years ago. It's not going to work today because it used to be you could get a job on an assembly line at Ford and spend your whole life on that assembly line at Ford. And you could just be putting in your time. You didn't have to worry about, am I creating value for the customer? All you do, you did what you were told to do relatively mindlessly. Now, I would say, even in that situation, if what you were thinking about was how can I help the consumer the most, you're still going to move up faster. But if you didn't, you could still keep a job for life. That's not going to happen now because now things just change too fast. AI, you mentioned earlier, is a great example of that. Things are changing, boom, boom, boom. And so we have to be flexible. I mean, honestly, the reason the dinosaurs died out is because they weren't flexible. They couldn't adjust to the way things were changing. And and we don't want to be dinosaurs. We want to be flexible. And but that means we stay focused on where's my niche and how do I best create value in that niche.
To the point, I'm sorry. You sparked something in my brain, and what about situations where you are folks are living, like, say, West Virginia, right? The predominant industry in West Virginia is coal mining, and as the world starts to move more towards green energy, and we can talk all day about climate and how the climate is changing, but my question is, like, as we start to move away from coal, and as the market starts to move into more of these clean energy, solar power, wind power type situations, what do we do about those coal miners who now the value that they provided is no longer of any value because no one wants it? Is it the government's job to step in and retrain these folks and get them set up for success in another avenue, or is that something that belongs to them themselves?
I think it's reasonable to look at elements of both. Um, I'm always suspicious when the government does stuff because my concern is that they're probably going to do it wrong. But I think I mean, if it were done appropriately, I think there is a role for government in that. But I think there's also a role for the coal miners. I mean, did they get to be? My first question would be: was did they get to be coal miners because they had looked at all the ways they might create value and decided that that was the best route for them? And my guess is for 90% of them, the answer is no. That probably for most of them, they got that job like we talked about earlier because there was a job there. They just got out of high school. And so they went and got that job without ever even thinking about where would I be best suited from the rest of my life. Uh, and so part of my passion is teaching people to never get into that situation in the first place. Now, the other thing I would say is, um, in most of those circumstances, if those people immediately did switch over to saying, how can I best create value? Where do my strengths lie? So, for example, I'm sure, a coal miner out there whose hobby is woodworking. And so he- maybe he loves woodworking. So he, my challenge to that coal miner would be, how can you build a transition now that you see coal mining is going to start going away? How can you transition toward being a cabinet maker and start planning that transition early? You don't wait till the company shuts down. You start going, I can see the end of the road here. You just brought it up. You're not even a coal miner and you see the end of the road. And so the first thing that would have to happen is the coal miners have to look ahead and go, and this isn't obviously not a thing against coal miners. It's people in every job have to be looking ahead and going, is this industry going to last? And if it doesn't, what am I going to do? And start planning for that ahead of time. I'm also a musician, and musicians are famous for having to have day jobs. It's that same sort of a thing, is that we can do things we love, um, and sometimes we have to acknowledge that we have to find ways to supplement that for the time being. So yeah, this guy that wants to be a cabinet maker may have to take a job at Circle K for 6 months while he starts to make that transition. And will that be economically hard on him? Yeah, a little bit, but he'll make it. I mean, and and a lot of it too is that we worry too much about what the job is. I started working when I was 11. I've never been out of work for more than 2 weeks since then. There's almost always jobs out there. They're there. But while you're planning, you may have to take a job you don't like. But during that, while you're taking that job you don't like, you have to be thinking of it as this is the job I'm not crazy about. I'm going to do it the best way I can. I'm going to create value for the customer. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to plan for the future. I'm going to plan on how I'm going to get out of it.
What do you tell people that look at you and say that they don't have time because they are either a single parent or they are the sole breadwinner for their family and they don't have the time or the bandwidth to think about the future the way that you and I have the time and the bandwidth to think about the future?
I would say it's a struggle. There's no question about that, but it's doable. Um, I mean, I- on Facebook, one of the things I notice is that many of the people who do the most complaining about their economics situation are posting 100 times a day on Facebook. Well, now, those two things are completely incompatible. Uh, they clearly have the time to do something else because they're posting 100 times a day on Facebook,
Right.
but they're spending their time complaining about their situation rather than rectifying it. And that's just sad. Those are the attitudes that we need to fix is that a lot of the problem is that people feel hopeless. It isn't, they're not posting 100 times a day because uh, they're trying to get out of thinking about the future. They've given up hope. And a lot of what I think my mission is to help revive that hope. I want to let people see that your future is in your hands, but it also helps to be a capitalist. Huh? Well, I just told you I got back from running. Why
Mhm.
do I run? Because I'm a capitalist. I invested an hour today in the hopes that I'll get a bigger profit in the future, that I'll live a year longer, that I'll be healthier a year longer. That's what a capitalist does. And a capitalist is anyone who invests resources of any sort, not just money, today in the hope of getting more tomorrow. Capitalism is the economics of hope. It says, I can do something with my own life to make my own future better. And that's what I want to do with my life. Uh, I saw an interesting article the other day that said people like me who lift weights and run and stuff like that were in danger of becoming right wing jerks. Her argument was is that if I got in really good shape, I couldn't empathize with somebody that wasn't in really good shape. Well, that's just stupid. When people are hurting, who are they going to turn to? They're going to turn to the strongest person they know.
Mhm.
You can't help anybody else if you're not strong yourself. And so, yeah, I want to be strong physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, because that's the only way I can be of value. And
That
so,
makes sense.
yeah, it makes perfect sense, but people just can't see it. They, it takes people like you and I to steer people in that direction, let them see that capitalism is great. It's the economy of hope. It's it's what gives you hope for the future. Because the anti-capitalist basically says, "What if I get hit by a bus tomorrow? Why should I run?" Well, that's the attitude. That's the attitude of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may die. It
Mhm.
only works if you die. It only makes sense if you get hit by that bus, which is not likely to happen. I mean, it's a very low probability event. So, my chances of getting to 100 years old are pretty good. I mean, I'm 77 now, and by the physical tests and stuff that I've done, physically I'm about 40. Well, That's what capitalist investing does for you. It it changes everything. And so you want to be in really good shape physically, mentally, emotionally. And when you do that, the the kinds of struggles that you've expressed concern about become a lot less concerning because you're equipped to deal with challenges. You've trained yourself to make those challenges overcomable.
Right.
And
Because self improvement, you either improve or you stagnate and become irrelevant, essentially.
yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the things that reminds me of is, people um, talk about the rich in inappropriate ways. They say things like, "Oh, the rich get rich and the poor get poorer." Well, first of all, that's not true. The rich do get rich, but they tend to drag the poor along with them. So everybody tends to be better off in capitalism. But if I rephrase that, what if I said people who run a lot every day get better at running, and people who don't run get worse at it? Would that surprise anybody?
No, not at all.
Yeah. No, you would go, well, of course, duh. Well, that's exactly what happens with money. People who focus on learning how to make money, how to manage money well, get good at managing money. And people who don't do that don't get good at it. Again, not a surprise. It's just a normal fact of life. But we don't look at those normal facts of life. We think of it the wrong way. Another big problem with people's criticism of capitalism is we're stuck in a time that no longer exists. If you look back from the year zero, let's say, to the year 1500, personal GDP, per capita GDP, did not increase one drop. That is, no economic progress was made by individuals for 1500 years. And it's probably longer than that. It's just we don't have records going back any further. What happened? What changed that? Well, in 1500, we started having capitalism. And it started out baby steps. So between 1500 and 1700, little improvement. Per capita GDP went up quite a few percentage points. Then at 1700, something really big happened. The United States.
Mhm.
That changed everything. We were the first country to have patent law, which we talked about earlier, enshrined in its Constitution. The Constitution says we have to have a patent office because the founders of our country understood that you have to have capitalism in order to grow the economy. And now every person in the world is about 18 times better off than they were in 1500.
So
That's
what's
in
your
the whole world. We're dragging the world along with us. In the US, it's more like 30 times more. So in economics, we call that growing the pie. Because here's the difference. In 1500, if you wanted to get something from somebody else, like I've already said, there was only a fixed amount of stuff. So what does that imply? If you want more, you got to take it from somebody else. That's where the legend of Robin Hood came from. And back then, Robin Hood made sense.
Mhm.
Now it doesn't. Why not? Because entrepreneurs today aren't taking from somebody else. They're making the whole pie that we share bigger. And so is Bill Gates rich? Yeah, he's rich. So what? I don't begrudge him that for an instant. Why not? Well, I'm talking to you on a PC. You're talking to me on a PC, probably. We're on the internet. None of this would have been possible without Bill Gates. He literally made all of us richer. Now, yeah, did he get more than I got? Yeah, but he made me richer. So what do I care how much he got? I'm better off because of Bill Gates. Jeff Bezos creating Amazon. I actually ran the numbers. Everybody in the country, on average, is better off by $2,000 to $3,000 a year because of Amazon. Look at all the gas we save by not going to stores.
Valid.
Amazon can negotiate prices way better than I was able to without Amazon. Everything is cheaper. We're all richer because of just Jeff Bezos. Now, did he make a buck on the deal? Oh, yeah, he made a lot of bucks on the deal. Again, why do I care if he made me richer? So, what the anti-capitalists want us to do is shut down Jeff Bezos to make ourselves poorer. Well, what kind of thought process is that? It's just stupid. And by the way, if you look at the 10 richest people in the world, they're all in that category. Every single one of them got there by making all of us better off. And so we have to stop begrudging them the money they made and start saying, hey, these guys did great things for us. I mean, Elon Musk, he is putting satellites into orbit and making moon rockets as an individual. Imagine, I mean, if I were to tell you 50 years ago that some guy is going to make moonshots on his own dime, you'd call me a complete idiot.
Right. There's no way someone's going to have that much money to be able to do that.
He's doing that now. Is he going to make a profit on it? Well, I'm sure he hopes so, but he's doing something that's going to help all of us. That's the important part. Is that I'm talking to you right now on Starlink. Well, that's Elon Musk. And out here where I live, I'm on a ranch out in the middle of nowhere, and without Starlink, internet was really, really bad. But Elon Musk fixed that for me. Now, yeah, I pay him $100 a month or whatever it is to do that, but that's less than my cable bill was before. So he's doing me a big favor. And that's the way we want to start looking at the world. It's starting to see that entrepreneurs are helping us, not hurting us. Now, on the other hand, like I said, there are bad actors everywhere. So if there's some guy running a hedge fund whereby splitting the difference on stocks and not helping the economy a bit and not contributing value in any way, yeah, that's a place for the government to step in and say, we're not going to let you make money that way because you're not doing something that's creating value. But you certainly can't say that Musk and Bezos and Gates aren't creating value. They're creating value, or were, in case Gates is retired, but they're creating value hand over fist, and we're all sharing in that value. And so Robin Hood is now reversed. We're not the guys with the money aren't taking from the rich. I'm taking from the poor to give to themselves. They're doing stuff to make them rich that gives to all of us. They're creating value for the world and making a buck doing it. And so we have to shift that whole mindset. We have to look at it and say, this whole idea of capitalism is not what it meant in 1500. The rich
Uh-huh.
aren't rich because they're taking it from us. The rich are rich because they're making the pie bigger. They're creating stuff that we couldn't have without them. And you look at almost, that's part of where Marx got it so wrong. Marx was the father of socialism,
Right.
was incredibly naive, incredibly. He grew up in the early 1800s in a small town in Bavaria, I think maybe Prussia. I'm not sure, but it was a small town, and little streets lined with mom and pop shops. And like a lot of young people, he thought that was the ideal. He thought that this is just the way life should be. So then he moved to Berlin and found out about big companies and stuff like that. Thought that was just terrible. Part of what he did when he built socialism, when he came up with the ideas for it, part of his whole reason for doing it was to prevent progress. He wanted to keep the world full of little mom and pop shops so that everybody was just out there doing their thing. And he tried to invent a system that would do it. And it does. Socialism stops progress. You look at the places where there's socialism, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela. Anybody going to call those successful countries? No.
No, but you also look at the European nations like Sweden, Switzerland, Norway. I mean, those are
That's
very
true.
successful and they're very happy and they have a blended system of
They
socialism
have
and
a blended
capitalism.
system, and that's the difference. They are capitalist countries, pure capitalists, but they have a larger safety net. But most of them are backing further and further away from that because they're starting to find out, as Margaret Thatcher said, sooner or later you run out of other people's money. And that's a big problem. Um, you can only give away so much because you've got to take it from somebody to give it to somebody else. And the problem is the government doesn't do that very efficiently. Free markets do it much more efficiently. Um, those countries would be the first ones to tell you they are not socialist. They call themselves social democracies. That is what they're saying is we're a democracy, but we're socially minded. That's nothing at all like socialism. The definition of socialism is the government owns the means of production and all property. Well, none of the companies in Sweden are owned by the government. Uh, now, they do own a couple of the industries. Some of them own the healthcare system, and some of them own the education system. But look at what happens in the real world. Have you ever heard of anybody going to Sweden to get a procedure done because
No,
medical care was better in Sweden? Now, people from Sweden come here to get procedures done because we have better medical care here. Do people go to college in Sweden? No,
not that
we have
I've ever
students
heard
here
of.
from
Right.
yeah, we have students here from all over the world. Why? Because well, our system is better. And I would say our system isn't great yet. There's a lot of problems with the system capitalism could make better, but it's still better than what the rest of the world has got. And so none of these things are accidents. They're effects of government. Um, and the other problem with large safety nets is they have a tendency to become hammocks.
Hmm.
Instead of here's a place where you can rest for a minute while you get your act together and get back on a productive route, creating value for others, it becomes, well, I'm just going to sit here and wait. And that's what people tend to do. In fact, this would be an interesting thing for your listeners to look up. Um, the the first colonies in the United States were collectivists, socialists.
I did not know that.
Jamestown and the Mayflower colony both started out as collectivist enterprises. Everything was divided equally. And what happened was, in fairly short order, 20 years or so, there was rampant starvation. Literally, people were eating shoe leather, digging up corpses. Why was this happening? And if you read the accounts from the people that were there, and there's lots of them out there, this is not stuff that is hidden away somewhere. Um, if you look up the accounts, what you find is that people say things like, uh, try to remember the quote as exactly as I can. It was it was a wonderful time for the drones. By that he meant the people that didn't want to work, that, because they could just kick back and not have to do anything.
Right.
And and yeah, that you can't build a society where that's going to happen because people are human. And the socialists plan for a reality that doesn't exist. It assumes that, well, if everybody's taken care of, everybody will give their best. It's not going to happen. It doesn't happen. And we have to plan economic systems and economic ways of doing things, not for a reality we would like to have, but for the reality we do have. I said, I'm a musician. I'm also a big Beatles fan. John Lennon's a terrific guitarist, songwriter, singer, but
Hmm.
he wasn't an economist. And so he writes a song where he says, imagine there's no heaven, imagine there's no countries, imagine there's no property, imagine no possessions. Okay. He titled the song correctly, Imagine.
Hmm.
He's talking about a world that's imaginary. And yeah, you can imagine a world like that. But what does it actually mean? Does it make any sense? I mean, imagine no possessions. That means you and I have to share a toothbrush? I mean, what's up with that? How do you have no possessions? Well, it's just silly. It's a dumb idea. Um, and so that's one of the big problems with the anti-capitalists is that they're trying to plan for a world where it doesn't match the world as it is. And you might go, well, gee, wouldn't it be nicer if we gave everybody what they wanted and everybody worked as hard as they could? That might be nice, yeah, but it's not going to happen, not ever, because people are people, and uh, and it isn't just people. I mean, in order to survive, every organism has to have self-interest, and if you were to put a bale of hay 100 meters from a cow and another one 500 meters from a cow, where's the cow going to go? He's going to go to the close one.
Hmm.
Now, I don't know if cows, in fact, I'm pretty sure cows are not capable of calculating calories, but at some level, they instinctively understand that it takes X amount of calories to get to a bale of hay, and I'm going to get X amount of calories when I eat that hay. And if the amount of calories I burn on the way to the hay exceeds the amount of calories I'll get from the hay, I'm going to die over time because I have to take in as many calories as I expend getting there. And and I say this is true of any organism. You put a plant in a room, it's going to grow toward the window every single time. They aren't going to grow away from the window. Now, do plants know how to grow toward, know that they're supposed to grow toward sunlight or blood? No, I don't think so. But they behave as though they have self-interest. What this is called is spontaneous order. It's in the natural world, things work out spontaneously. There's no plan. It isn't
Hmm.
like there's somebody. No, I'm not saying there's no God, but I'm saying that there's no day-to-day plan being made by anybody running the world. Uh, so how does this all work? Well, you and I are good examples of that. Our bodies are constructed on spontaneous order. We like to think our brains are in charge. We're not. We're hallucinating. First of all, half the cells in your body aren't even human. They're viruses, bacteria, fungi, but they're not human. So clearly my brain can't control them. But my brain can't control even the human cells. Think about a cell in your kidney. That cell has no idea that you exist. It's just going through its little cell life, doing what it has to do to stay alive and procreate. That's its only job. Make more cells, stay alive. It just happens that its job is doing stuff that benefit you. And even if you could take charge with your brain, the trillions of cells in your body would take trillions of years to address all of them and tell them what to do. You'd be dead before you could do it.
Hmm.
Now, occasionally the process gets out of hand. That's what we call cancer. That's when cells make the transition from self-interest to selfishness, to greed. That's when they stop doing what's best for the whole body and start doing something that's only for them, where it's actually destroying the body by doing it. That's when government, your brain, has to step in and say, we're going to have to fix this. I'm going to have to go get treatment because I've got these cells that are running rampant that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Hmm.
That's when, we talked about earlier, that's when government has to step in. That's not a time for government to stand down. That's a time for the government to jump in with both feet and say, there's something going wrong here and we need to fix it. There's a bad actor doing stuff that's hurting the economy and we need to fix it. And there's lots and lots of examples. I mean, tons. I could probably go in all day, but a couple of quick ones. Squirrels. You look at squirrels, they don't look at their job as to plant trees. They're out gathering food for themselves. And it happens to help the environment they're in by doing that. Spontaneous order. Nobody told squirrels you have to go out and gather nuts to plant trees. The squirrels gather nuts for food. Same thing with bees. Bee isn't going around saying, oh, my job is to pollinate these flowers. So I've got to get to this flower this on some schedule. No, their job is to make honey. They're gathering honey or pollen to do that. Does it help the economy? Yeah. I mean, a huge part of our environment is dependent upon bees. And so, but they're doing that spontaneously. They're doing it because it's what's good for bees. And the problem with socialism is socialism tries to assign everything. So if the world were run by socialists, the environment, they might say, okay, bee, your job is to gather nuts. And squirrel, your job is to gather pollen. How long is that going to work? Well, it's not, because squirrels are not anatomically fixed to pollinate plants, and
Right.
bees are going to have a real hard time carrying acorns. Um, it- that's the problem. It has to happen spontaneously, because the environment, the world, the economy is too big to control. The problem with it is, and the reason I think many people are socialists or anti-capitalists, it's messy. There is no plan. And so since there's no plan, it's really hard to know where it's going next. And it's very, very hard to trust, to just go, it's going to work out. There's a system here, and it may be happening spontaneously, but it works out in the long run. It has for thousands of years, and it's going to keep working out. Uh, if you look at herd animals, like a herd of horses, and what happens with herd animals, any herd, you can pick almost anyone you want, use horses. They're going along in this clump. Okay, they're all there together, and now they sense a threat from the back. Maybe they smell a mountain lion or who knows what. But so they're sensing something bad happening south of them. So what happens? Everybody in the herd starts circulating through the herd, moving north. Okay, which creates these circles, these constant circles of movement, spontaneous order. Now, as it turns out, a fascinating way, does that expose the people in the back to greater predation? Yes, it does. But that motion keeps going. And so there's been tons of studies done that show that the average predation goes down.
Hmm.
Everybody spends their time in the back. Everybody takes some of that risk. But when the herd is functioning that way, predators don't attack as much. So you cut down the average predation. And that's the way it is in our society. You have to trust the fact that, yes, things are going to make you a little worse off sometimes, maybe a little better off other times. But in the long run, it's all going to be fine. It's all going to work out if we just let the system do what it does. But yeah, it's messy. It's hard to predict. What's AI going to do? I don't know what AI is going to do. Nobody does. Uh, I mean, I could make some guesses. I mean, I think it's likely that it is going to impact folks who have boring, repetitive jobs. I don't think it's going to replace you or me. I'm having a hard time imagining AI asking me thoughtful questions.
Yeah, that's
And
although they're trying to replace us with AI
they're
models,
trying, but
but
yeah, I don't see that. I don't see that happening very soon. And I don't see them being able to give the kind of answers that I'm giving you. Um, it could regurgitate stuff that you could see anywhere, but I think a lot of the stuff that I'm saying to you is stuff that you've probably never heard before.
yeah, I mean,
And
I've learned, I've heard about the the constructs of it, but I've never actually heard it explained the way that you're explaining it, and I really do
yeah,
appreciate that. It's
and I
important,
think that AI is never going to be able to do that, because
right?
part of my doing that is based on my emotional attachment to what I'm doing.
Hmm.
Just like part of what you're doing today is based on your emotional attachment to doing it and wanting to create value. And AI has no emotions. It can't get attached to stuff. And all it can do is what it was programmed by some human to do. It looks like it's doing stuff on its own, but it's not. It's responding to programming.
So, do you see, and this is my last question before we wrap it up, but do you see an eventuality where technology reaches a point that allows us to have a socialist construct at the base level of our economy, while the capitalist nature is derived for the value driven market where people are able to create value because of the passions that they have. I mean, for me, example, I've got the time and the money because of that pension to actually put into a passion of mine to create that value. So I guess my question for you is, do you ever see a future where socialism can be the basis of an economy that allows for people to focus on their passions.
I hope not, because think of what that would really mean. I mean, is most of the people in that system now? I think you're the exception. Let me put it that way. Most of the people in that system would vegetate because of self-interest. They're going to say, "Well, I don't have to work, so I won't." They aren't trained to create value. They aren't trained to explore, all of those things. And again, it's not that I'm against helping people. I don't see that as helping. I mean, I if you want to talk about can we develop a safety net that really works, that gets people out of the situation they're in and helps them get somewhere that's better. And yeah, I can talk about that. I don't have a problem with that at all. But unfortunately, the safety nets we have tended to build here and in Europe don't tend to always be, in fact, very seldom tend to be safety nets. They tend to be places to live. They tend to be hammocks. And what we're doing is imprisoning people. We're putting them in a situation where they have to spend the rest of their lives dependent on government. In what reality is that helping doing people a favor? I mean, I can't imagine any punishment worse. I mean, we're giving them life in hell. And gosh, would I want I don't want any part of doing that to people. Again, if we're talking about really helping, okay, I can give you a quick example. I used to have to commute an hour and 15 minutes each way, uh, one of the jobs I had, and I would run across a lot of homeless people at the stoplights, and they wanted me to give them money. Well, what I did was I went to Costco and I would buy cases of beans, and whenever they came up to me, I would hand them a can of beans. If somebody wants to eat, I'm in. If they're going to stand there on a street corner and beg because they're starving, I'll help them. But if they want money that I don't know what they're going to do with it, that they're going to go buy wine or drugs or whatever, I can't play that game. I'm not going to help make their life worse. I'm not going to be a codependent.
Mhm.
But if we're talking about helping somebody, yeah, I'm in. And I think that's the way we want the world to be. And but the problem is government does that very, very badly. They don't know how to give somebody a can of beans. All they know how to do is give them money.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many times I've been in line at a store behind somebody and they're putting 6 quarts of whiskey on their EBT. You know, is that the help I want to give people? Or they've got a whole ton of snacks. They're buying ice cream and candy bars and, with their EBT. I don't want to do that. That's why along back when the churches and charitable institutions were doing it, I think it was a lot better because they could hold you accountable. They were right there locally. And by the way, I think if you're going to have a welfare system, that's the way you need to do it. It needs to be really, really local so that the people that are giving it to you know you.
Mhm.
If we have to hire thousands of people to go out and walk around and go to your house and help you get better and see what you're doing with the money you're getting and blah, 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 that's what we should do. We've got to build a system that really helps, not a system that pretends to. But too much of the time, that's what government does. You asked about in our previous conversation about running for office or what I learned when I was uh, an aide to a member of Congress. And one of the things I learned was the instinct is do something even if it's wrong. There's pressure to act,
Mhm.
and so too many times the action happens so fast that there was never any time to think it through carefully. And so we end up with half-baked solutions that end up hurting people. Another good example is the food pyramid. You probably saw that when you were a kid.
Yep.
And what was number one? Carbohydrates. That's crazy. Ice cream is better than beef. I mean, it's just nuts. but that was pressure from the food industry to do something. Now, the good news is now Kennedy is actually changing that. Secretary of Health Kennedy is turning that around. But, but yeah, the government can, and again, the people I knew there when I was an aide to a member were good people. Most of them were really there to try and help. But they're in a system that makes that dramatically dilutes their effect. And that's why I stopped. That's why, in fact, when I went in, I was planning to run for Congress. But I eventually decided no, because I can have a lot more impact somewhere else. The good I want to do is too diluted as a member of Congress. It gets washed. In fact, I've literally seen people write a bill that after it got through the process ended up doing exactly the opposite of what they intended.
It's amazing the way that that happens up there on the hill.
Yeah,
Um, Yeah, so I mean, I asked you about it because I do eventually want to run for Congress, and so I'm hearing feedback from you, and it kind of confirms some of my concerns that I wouldn't have as much impact at that level, just because it would be, especially in the House where I want to be, is it would be 1 year on with another year campaigning because it's only a 2 year stint.
yeah.
So it just, to me, it feels like it would be a slow process. But I see your points. I do see your points, and um, it makes a lot of sense now because when I first encountered you and I started talking to you, I did my research on you. I'm like, this guy is going to be someone that I don't know that I'm gonna get along with because he's smarter than me, but he has a problem with socialism, and I don't have necessarily a huge problem with socialism because I recognize that there are certain things that are good for us. But like you, I also have a desire for a conservation of funds, and I know that money has to come from somewhere, and eventually that money is gonna run dry because we're pulling it from people who are then going to become part of the system that needs the help. Um, so I mean, it was a really good conversation. I really do appreciate it. What I want to do is give you a chance to talk about your book. What spurred you to write it, and what do you hope people get out of it?
Well, like you, I was in the military, and I took an oath to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I think the biggest threat to this country right now is socialism. Um, uh, Democratic social. One of the chapters in the book deals with the idea of democratic socialism. If you look at the Democratic Socialists of America's website, what you'll see is what they envision is this is a transitory step to full on socialism. They want to, the Democratic Socialists want a world where the government owns the means of production and all property. They want to turn the United States into North Korea. And they talk about things like income inequality. How could income inequality be any worse than it is in North Korea, where you have a few elite that are multi billionaires and the poor are literally starving to death? That's true in virtually every socialized country. Socialism doesn't work. It's not good for people. It it and it could destroy everything we've built here. If we implement socialism, it will destroy it. Absolutely. There's no question about that. And so I wanted to write a book, and I mean, I'd like to think that I've made some headway talking to you. I think I
You
probably
have, yeah,
have.
absolutely.
And that's why I wrote the book, is that I'm hoping to let people see the truth and change some minds, to let them see that a lot of what they're asking for, they really, really don't want to get. And I think I did a decent job of it. I think it's I think the book is pretty good. Um, and you to put in a quick, it's available for pre-order right now on Amazon. Um, and I hope they'll go out there and get it. In fact, the subtitle is um, that it's exploring the economic errors that undermine utopian ideals. And that's the problem, is that I'm not criticizing the ideals. They're utopian. But the economic errors make realizing those ideals impossible. And I guess in summation, what I would paraphrase the Beatles and say, in my ideal world, I would say the value you take is equal to the value you make. That's the
That's
world
a
I want to live.
powerful statement right there. That's
It's economic karma.
Mhm.
I mean, it's the way I think we all really want to live.
Dr. Cardell, I sincerely do appreciate you coming on the show. And for the listeners, make sure you hop over to Amazon and find that book and get it pre-ordered because I know I'm going to. And we will catch you on the flip side. Dr. Cardell, thank you again. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.